Hello, everybody. Welcome into Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. I hope everybody had a wonderful weekend. Happy early July 4th to everybody. We had a lot to cover this weekend, mostly NBA. That's what we're going to be going over as the NBA free agency period officially started at 6 p.m. yesterday. We're going to go over all the major dominoes that fall, including Chris Paul, Paul George being signed by the 76ers, the Thunder making moves, what the Clippers might do, as well as a trade that took place right before free agency with DeJounte Murray being sent over to the New Orleans Pelicans for a couple of players and picks. We'll break down all of the major NBA action today before we get back into some of the other sports that we'll cover for the rest of the week. But today is all about the NBA. And before we get into our main story, remember that if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to GSMCPodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw chat. Go ahead and throw that in the comments. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate all of you guys for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Monday afternoon. But like I was saying, we are going to start off our show here today. In the entire show today will be around the NBA with free agents and trades, but we're going to start off with the biggest story of them all, the biggest signing that has happened so far, that being Paul George officially leaving the Los Angeles Clippers and joining up with Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey to go play for the Philadelphia 76ers. This is a move that, was kind of telegraphed from a mile away. There was plenty of interest on both sides. They were trying to get a trade, but the Clippers, the only trade partner they could find was with the Warriors. And this move, along with a lot of the other moves that have been going on, some of the more surprising ones, the Nuggets not being able to sign KCP back, all these teams making surprise decisions. It all has to do with the second apron. Into the second apron in a little bit. We'll talk about why all these teams are scared of it. But right now we're going to focus on Paul George and the 76ers, and we'll get back to the Clippers later on in our show. But Paul George leaves the Clippers, heads on over to the 76ers, and joins a team led by Joel Embiid, led by Tyrese Maxey. They go and draft Jared McCain, who I think is a great addition to that team. His ability to shoot the ball, really being able to space the floor. But Paul George joins the 76ers here. He's going to be that third star. This is the second time that the Sixers have been able to, put together a big three, and first time since Jimmy Butler, Ben Simmons, and Joel Embiid were there. It is on paper probably their best roster. You could make the argument that 2019 Philadelphia roster was better, the one that got eliminated by the Kawhi Leonard shot from the corner in Game 7. Legendary moment there. But, this is probably the best roster that the 76ers have put together, and they've still got a little more money to play with, get some role players. But as it sits right now, you have Joel Embiid, Paul George, Tyrese Maxey, Jared McCain, Kelly Oubre, Eric Gordon, Andre Drummond off the bench, and maybe Eric Gordon starts at shooting guard, but that is a little bit of a weaker position. If I was making those lineups, I'd probably throw Jared McCain in there. Eric Gordon wasn't having his greatest season, and McCain can play off ball there, but that's a conversation for another day. This Sixers team has a lot of promise. Now, this is a Sixers team that is going all in. We talked a lot about it on the playoff run when Joel Embiid and the Sixers were still in it against the Knicks, that Joel Embiid wants that commitment to winning. He wants them to go all in for him. Otherwise, he's threatened to leave. And if this isn't all in, I don't really know what is. Paul George is a guy that fits their timeline. He's a little bit older, and He's had his injury problems. He's had his disappearing act problems. Same thing with Joel Embiid. But he joins this team, and on paper, it makes them contenders in the East, right? We've talked ad nauseum on and on this show about how weak the Eastern Conference was, about how there's so many opportunities for these teams, these contenders in the East, to catch up to the Celtics, because the Celtics are going through their own stuff. They just signed Derek White to a big deal. They still need to sign Jason Tatum. The team is officially up for sale. That news broke today as well, and that stuff we'll cover in another episode or in another segment. But the Sixers are trying to trying to beat the Celtics. That's the name of the game in the East right now, right? And adding Paul George to that team, what he's able to do, a veteran presence. Obviously, he's a top player in the league now. You question how long he's going to be able to do it. They give him that 4-year deal that he was looking for. They give him a 4-year, $212 million max contract. And the Sixers are able to do it because they had a lot of money, right? The Clippers, like we've talked about a little bit, were flirting with the second apron, right? And there's plenty of teams that are flirting with that right now that don't want to get into it because it really handicaps you as far as what you can do in the future with picks. It really hurts you. It doesn't let you use those mid-level exceptions. It's something that really handicaps the teams, and it's something that I think is cool that they put in place. They let them have the luxury cap, but it's also stops the teams like the Clippers or the Warriors from spending and building that team that other teams just can't compete with because they're willing to throw more money at it than anybody else. So second apron in general is a good thing, but we're getting to see it in effect, especially so far this offseason, right? The Sixers had a lot of money. They were top 5 in the league as far as cap space. Now, a lot of that has gone away now that they spend $200 million each on Tyrese Maxey and Paul George. But they bring those guys in with the window they have with Joel Embiid, which, again, we don't know how long that's going to be. That is a window that could be incredibly short. That's a window that could end next season. We don't know what the injury kind of situation is. We don't know what his excitement level to stay in Philly is. He keeps, at least at the beginning of last season, he was talking about potentially getting out of there. But adding Paul George to the 76ers is huge for them. It currently probably puts them second in the East. I know they were a 7 seed last year. A lot of that had to do with, again, injuries, and that's going to be something that the Sixers have to find a way around, right? They only have about $9 million left to go and get some other guys to fill in that bench, but right now they're a little weak in shooting at the shooting guard position. Again, they drafted Jared McCain, and having him there, I think, really helps shore that up. But outside of your starting 5, there's not too much on the bench. Eric Gordon signed. He's coming off not a great season with the Phoenix Suns after missing a lot of time from the league, but he comes in, and this is a Sixers team that can do damage if they stay healthy. I really do believe that. And I think Paul George, I don't want to say this is the best team that he's joined because he's just coming off of a Clippers team that had Kawhi Leonard, that had James Harden. Again, all these guys are past their prime, but this might be the best team that Paul George has been a part of. And having him as a second, maybe even a third star in this situation, depending on how much you believe in a guy like Tyrese Maxey, who is the future in Philadelphia, but might not be the present. As great as he is, he obviously is awesome. He signs that 5-year, $204 million contract. So we're not gonna slander Tyrese Maxey here, but I think this is a great signing for Philly. This is about as good as they could have gotten it. There were lots of rumors swirling around them. They wanted to go out and get that third star. Paul George was one of them. Jimmy Butler was another, a return to Philly after leaving after one season in 2019. They needed to get that third star, and Paul George was the biggest domino. He was the biggest guy out there, and Philly was able to get the job done. They gave him the contract he wanted. And the big sticking point between the Clippers and Paul George was the length. Paul George wanted a 4-year contract. The Clippers didn't want to give him anything more than a 3-year contract, and they didn't want to give him the max, right? So good on Paul George. I don't blame him for leaving. Go get your money. Go win a ring. they're a legit ring chasing spot right now. You can go and get a cheap veteran, a guy that really wants to chase a ring. If I'm looking at places around the league to go, there are plenty of them. Plenty of them. Maybe you're able to entice DeMar DeRozan. I doubt it. I'm sure he's asking for a good amount of money, and that seems like a guy that the Lakers might want to target. But if they can get, a quality, they don't even need someone as elite. I guess elite is a strong word for DeMar DeRozan, but they don't need someone of DeMar DeRozan's caliber. They just need to fill out the bench now. And if they're able to fill out their bench, it's already kind of filled out. But if they're able to add just a little bit more talent, someone to add spacing in that second unit, as good as the theory of Eric Gordon is, he hasn't been able to perform to the level that you want him to perform to. If you're looking at him to be your main contributor on the second unit, it should be a lot of fun. It should be a really good team in Philly, and they've still got time to add. They've still got the money, the resources to add a couple more pieces. Like I said, they're about 13 million under the first apron, about 23 million under the second apron. So they have, if they really wanted to push it with this team, about $20 million to go out and get some other guys. I'm not sure how, willing they are to go get, to go over the first apron, to go over into the luxury tax. But that's something that the ownership in Philly needs to figure out. I do think that this team is really good and is in a really, really good position. They have the money and the assets still to build a contender for a short while. As long as they stay healthy, this team is probably the best Sixers team that we have seen in the entirety of the process era, the finish the process era, the entirety of the Joel Embiid era. And I'm very excited to see what they can do this season. I think re-signing Kelly Oubre, who was really good for them last season, coming off the bench, is a huge get back. If they can get a couple guys kinda at that caliber, fill out the roster, they're going to have very few holes left. And then the question is, are they going to be able to beat the Celtics, right? Are they going to be able to compete with how complete of a roster that these Celtics are? And we will see that. But I am very, very excited for this Sixers. I think all these guys deserve a ring. As much as I am an anti-Philly fan, these guys deserve a ring. But anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts on Paul George joining the 76ers. Like I said, I think it's a great move for the 76ers, for Paul George. I think it's about the best move that the 76ers could make. But in our next segment, we're going to continue our coverage of the NBA. We're going to talk a little bit about the big signing of today, that being Klay Thompson. Klay Thompson signs a 3-year, $50 million deal to join Luka Doncic and the Mavs, coming off a Western Conference title. We'll talk about what that move means for the Mavericks after they lost a couple pieces and if this improves their team. So stick around for that. We'll be right back here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we just went over Paul George officially joining the 76ers, what that means for their future, if that is a great move, which I think it is for both parties there. As long as they can stay healthy, I think that is a contending team, especially in the East there. We are going to continuing our coverage of the NBA free agency day 2 right now. We're going to talk a little bit about Klay Thompson, the big signing of the day. One of the last true huge dominoes left on the board. Obviously, after leaving Golden State, the 5-time All-Star there, a multiple-time champion, he hits free agency, tests the waters, ends up signing a 3-year, $50 million deal with the Dallas Mavericks. We'll talk about what that means for him, for his future, how he fits in with the Mavericks, and if this is a good move for the defending Western Conference champions. But before we get into that, remember that if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to GSMCPodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Go ahead and throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate all of you guys for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Monday afternoon. But like I was saying, we are going to continue our NBA free agency talk for the day. Moving on to the Dallas Mavericks and Klay Thompson. Klay Thompson, the last big fish, or one of the last big fish in this free agency pile. He leaves Golden State for the first time in his career. Some people are saying it's the end of an era. It was kind of signaled for a while. Golden State was going to have to pay him a good amount of money to stay, and Golden State needs to invest in other players if they want to continue to stay relevant as far as competition in the West goes. He leaves for Dallas, joining up with Luka and Kyrie Irving, adding some shooting that they sorely needed, right? You look back in the finals, and outside of Luka, there weren't too many threats for outside shooting. They were able to leave guys like PJ Washington wide open in the corner. It's one of those things that, sometimes it hurt the other team, but they were able to key in on guys like Luka and not really worry too much about the spacing on the outside because they didn't have that threat of a shot. Now, this isn't a guy, Klay isn't a guy that, you have to just post up in the corner. He's a guy that can move around, hit a three from anywhere. He's one of the greatest three-point shooting. He's one of the greatest three-point shooters in the history of the NBA. He's got a career 41% three-point shot. Now, he did have one of his worst seasons, his second worst shooting season in his career, but his second worst shooting season is still a 38.7% three-point shot, right? That's good for one of the best in the league, and that was on, really high volume, over 8 3-pointers a game. This is a huge get for a team like the Mavericks that, outside of Luka, and even Kyrie struggled with this, they didn't have consistent offense all the time, and Luka wasn't enough right there. He's one of those guys that Klay Thompson, you can rely on him to get hot, get a heater. Obviously, you go back for some of his career-defining moments. He puts up like 50 points with 2 dribbles, or he can get hot, hits the most amount of threes in a half. He's one of the best pure shooters of all time. And sure, he's lost a step on defense, and that is a little bit of a concern when you're talking about a Dallas Mavericks team that, while they were better defensively than they were at the beginning of the season, especially in the last third and in the playoffs, they still struggled with that. That was still their main weakness. That was where, if you're looking to improve for Dallas, that's probably the number one area. But shooting was definitely a need. Klay Thompson, again, not getting any younger, but getting him on a 3-year, $50 million deal is not bad at all. You're getting him, it's not the most expensive contract, but you're getting him for less than the max. He's joining a successful team. Now, if I'm Klay Thompson, do I leave the Warriors? Probably not. But you go get your money at this point. And if that's the best that the market was offering, I think that's a pretty fair price point for him. He's not there for the super long term, so you have outs. There's, I believe, a player option in there after year 3 or after year 2. So he has an opportunity to get out after just 2 years in Dallas if he doesn't like the fit there. But I can't imagine this being a disaster. I can see him regressing a little bit, but like I said, regressing from a 38% 3-point shooter is gonna regress to 35 next year at max. That's still a pretty big drop off. But if you have a guy that's coming out there shooting 5, 6, 7 threes a game, and he's able to make 35% of them, that's a great weapon to have on the outside. It's a great weapon to have when you are trying to make a push there. He's a guy that you can rely on to get some offense when Luka is getting locked down or when he's a little tired, as we saw in the finals with the Celtics really keying in on him and him not being able to rely on some of his other guys when Kyrie Irving was struggling. So more instant offense for the Mavericks as they look to defend their Western Conference title. It is a huge, huge get for them. Other suitors for Klay Thompson, obviously the Warriors were there, but that relationship kind of was done. The main suitors outside of the Dallas Mavericks were, the Magic. That's an interesting fit there. They went out and they got KCP. We'll talk a little bit about that in the next segment, actually. But they go out and they get KCP instead of him. They needed shooting. But the Lakers were one that I was kind of shocked he didn't end up going to. Now, maybe the Mavericks are a better spot for him, but, being able to stay kind of close to where you are, LA and San Fran aren't too far away from each other. But it's an interesting choice to be sure. And I like the fit in Dallas. I do, but I think there were better places for him. The more I think about it, the question is, can he be an effective starter? If you're the Mavericks, you're kind of banking on him being that effective 2 guard, on your team, right? Kyrie, Luka Doncic, and then Klay Thompson, and then the 2 big guys. Again, the defense is going to be a little bit lacking with Klay. He's lost a step defensively. He was one of those elite 3-and-D guys, but PJ Washington off the bench is not the worst guy. If Klay Thompson can continue his near 40% shooting, it's something that could absolutely benefit. Kelsey asks what my favorite sports movie is. There's a lot of them up there. Remember the Titans is a pretty good one. I didn't realize how far San Fran to LA was, 8 hours. But to Dallas is, it's one of those moves that I like the fit. Like I said, I just am not convinced that was really the most money that he was going to get. When I expected him to test the market, I thought he would get a little bit more. And obviously his 0 for 10 performance leaves a little bit of a bad taste in your mouth. But, he's still one of the best 3-point shooters of all time. And if he can be anywhere close to what he was 2 seasons ago, a 41% shooter, then you take that on 3 years, $50 million for a team that really needed some outside shooting, some options to turn to outside of Luka when Kyrie was struggling. But anyway, in our next segment here, we are going to move into some lesser some lower key signings, some of my favorite signings so far of the free agency. Mighty Ducks was a good one. But we're going to talk a little bit about CP3 joining the. We're going to talk a little bit about Kentavious Caldwell-Pope joining the Magic, what the fits there are like, as well as a couple other signings that I like so far that were a little more low key. So stick around for that. We'll be right back here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube. Absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube, absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube.
Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we've just gone over two of the biggest signings so far in NBA free agency, with Paul George leaving the Clippers and joining the Philadelphia 76ers to join a new big three up there with Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid. And then we talked about Klay Thompson joining the Dallas Mavericks down with Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic, the defending Western Conference champions, add one of the greatest shooters of all time. In this segment, we are going to talk a little bit more about some lower key signings, some of my favorite signings, excuse me, that have happened so far in these first 24, 48 hours of free agency. We'll talk about Chris Paul, we'll talk about KCP, and then we'll talk about Derrick Jones signing to the Clippers. We'll talk about all of that in just a second. But before we get into that, remember that if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you got to do is go to GSMCPodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw it in the comments, go ahead and throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. For instance, Kelsey asks if I think Paul George will succeed. I do. I think that it's definitely a great signing for both sides. I think that's the best that the Sixers could have done. With everyone that was out there in free agency, I think he's probably the best fit. He can work off ball a little bit, and his ability to still be that star player when they need him to step up. He's shown flashes of being able to do that even as he does get a little bit older. But like I was saying, once again, that link is GSMCPodcast.net. We are going to move into some of my favorite signs of the free agency series. Again, it's been just under 24 hours at 6 p.m. yesterday, so when we end our show, we'll hit that 24-hour mark. But we'll talk about some of my three favorites, more low-key, you can say signings. They weren't the biggest people out there, but, they did get some great, they did join, joining, I want to start with him. Chris Paul joining the Spurs. He goes down and teams up with Victor Wembanyama on a 1-year, $11 million deal, laden with it. And that is a huge deal for the Spurs. Honestly, one of the biggest weaknesses for the Spurs last season was the fact that they didn't have a real point guard. Didn't have a guy that was able to facilitate, get Wemby the ball, run that pick and roll with him. Now you go not having a point guard, not having a guy that can distribute the ball, to one of the greatest passers in the history of the league, and Chris Paul. Chris Paul is a little bit older. He's not going to be able to, be that elite scoring guy that he was 5 years ago on the Suns. But if you look at what he was able to do with the second unit of State last season, he was able to lead them to and the first struggle Chris Paul there, he would keep it a game. Like, he's one of those guys that's able with passing, his facilitating, his ability to keep team together. It's one of the things that he's one of the best pure points ever. Probably top 10. Maybe. I haven't done a point guard list in a while, but Chris Paul joining Victor Wembanyama is going to be a lot of fun. What he's going to be able to do to get him the ball, for a guy that's 7'5", I think it'd be easy to get him the ball. It should really inflate his numbers, and adding him, along with getting Stephen Castle in the draft, being able to get these guys that can move all around and get good looks, obviously, it is huge for their development. Now, just second year, but having Paul George in there, having Paul in there in that something with Victor Wembanyama, I think is awesome. And that's probably my sign so far as fits go. There were talk of if the Spurs were going to get a point, and they might have gotten one of the best available at a relatively cheap deal. Again, 1 year, $11 million is a great deal for Chris Paul. He's he's older, so you don't want to commit to him long term. You don't want to give him all the money. He's probably not going to be your 1 point guard all the time, and they drafted Castle, so I expect Castle to be, as he develops, probably the guy that plays more minutes, but those you can call with Victor Wembanyama and awesome. And him running that offense is going to be so exciting to watch. I'm very excited to see what he do there. Another one that I really like the film. We talked about the Magic a little bit with Clay, but Casey continues joining the Magic year $66 million deal is another signing. The Magic, the reason they were so good last season, the reason they were able, as such a young team, to force a Game 7 in Round 1 against Cleveland Cavaliers is their defense. And they do have anybody that can throw and shoot. Paolo Banchero did his best, but he's not a shooter, right? Adding Kentavious Caldwell from Nuggets, he continued that defensive trend, getting the great defender there, and keeping that team identity strong. All the fixing his weakness was his shooting. KP was a great 3-and-D player for the Nuggets these last seasons, and then getting him, I think, is going to hurt a lot. They kind of with that apron, they signed Murray, they signed Jokic. They don't really have a great vendor that they can rely on. Who are Kentavious Caldwell Pope was to them. Now the question is, how can get even more low, because these guys are little. These guys don't have this. They're not young superstars. But KCP is a great 3-and-D player. He's able to defend almost every single thing. The shooting is what is going to be huge for the Magic. They're able to go out and get shooting. That's the reason that the Magic were. That's the reason that the Magic were in such good to go. Like Klay Thompson. There were so many discussions about the Magic getting a guy that can shoot, and they're able to get Kentavious Caldwell Pope while also not sacrificing. It's one of those things that's really, really tough to do nowadays, especially with how the defense is. But it's a great get by the Orlando Magic to continue to build around that young team, to continue around that, you know, that won't ruin the vibes of the team, that won't change the way that the team is run. I think that is a huge addition for the Magic, and I love this signing. I love this fit. Those were my two favorite signings. The other one that I think is a little more low key is Derrick Jones Jr. Joining Clippers. Having him join the Clippers there is great. Again, you lose Paul George, and that's gonna suck. But they didn't want to get into that second apron. They were definitely attempting to, cut down on salary. And Derrick Jones Jr., when he went and joined in with the Mavs, the ability for him to help that defense with his length was huge. And again, Clippers still have Kawhi. They just re-signed James Harden. We'll talk about the Clippers actually in the next segment a little bit. But having them in your team and also getting some defense to surround them is going to be what will be able to maybe have the Clippers stay where they are after letting a guy like Paul George walk. That is not an easy thing to just blow past, but it's definitely something that I believe getting a guy like Derrick Jones Jr. is a huge help. I apologize about the feed. I will attempt to get that fixed here. We're going to go to break. In our next segment, we're going to talk about the Clippers, actually. We're going to talk about what they've done this offseason, and we're going to talk about what they can do to improve or at least tread water in a very competitive West after a star like Paul George leaves. So stick around for that. We'll be right back here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. If you are just tuning in, we just finished talking about some of my favorite signings so far of the NBA free agency that's been going on for about 24 hours. We talked about Chris Paul joining the San Antonio Spurs with Victor Wembanyama. That's going to be an awesome duo to watch this season, how he's able to play with a budding young superstar in Wemby. We talked about KCP joining the young Orlando Magic, that defensive ability as well as his shooting, which is desperately needed down there in Orlando, is going to be a huge get for them. But and then we also talked about Paul George getting his massive max extension with the 76ers leading the Clippers, who we're going to talk about here in this segment. We'll talk about how they can rebound after losing a guy like Paul George. And then we also talked about Klay Thompson moving on to Dallas and joining Luka, Kyrie, and the defending Western Conference champions. Like I said, we are going to talk about the Clippers here in this segment, but before we get into that, remember that but if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you have to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments, throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate all of you guys for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Monday afternoon. But like I was saying, we are going to get into some Clippers here, because the Clippers have a very interesting free agency situation, right? They could have brought Paul George back, and instead they let him walk. Obviously, the reason they say they let him walk is because the second apron, they're scared of it, which is a good thing. I think the second apron is a great thing to have been added to the NBA. It helps the small market teams not just get bought out like that. But the Clippers had to make some tough decisions, and the second apron was kind of devised around a team like the Clippers. So, they're starting to feel the consequences there. They do make a decision that I don't quite understand, and they kind of chose James Harden over Paul George. They give James Harden a big 2-year, $70 million extension. And I know that's not a max contract, but still, giving a guy like James Harden a massive contract like that, he's making 23% of the cap space right there. $33 million a year. He's 35 years old. You still have Kawhi Leonard. He's obviously the face of this team. You bring in Derrick Jones Jr. to kind of be that Paul George replacement, and same thing with Nick Batum. Those two combined will probably be what that Paul George replacement is going to be. But rumor has it they're looking at trading Russell Westbrook. They're looking at moving on from him. You now take away a guy like Paul George from that team, and you're kind of left motionless, right? You're too old to, have a great future with this core. This is a clearly declining core, but they're also too old to really blow it up to get too many assets. And this is not a team that is in a position to blow it up. They're just moved into a new arena. They want to be competitive. They want to bring a championship to LA. They don't want to be those little brothers anymore after, years and years and years of clearly being the little brother. And they still kind of are to the Lakers, but they want to make a big statement. And it kind of is shocking to me why they chose a guy like James Harden over Paul George. And this is nothing against James Harden. I just think Paul George is going to age better than James Harden. We've already kind of seen James Harden fall off the cliff a little bit. His passing has improved, but his shooting has gone down the drain a little bit. He's not the same guy that gave you 30 points a night, 35 points a night in Houston. But you have Kawhi, who's hurt all the time. And if he can stay on the court, this team is competitive. But there's no way you can sit there and rely on a guy like Kawhi Leonard to stay on the court after everything that's gone on, right? This is a team that that doesn't really have any cap room. It doesn't really have any ability to go out and get someone on this because they don't really have any ability to go out and get a big free agent. Now, they've made a couple small moves. Like I said, they brought in Derrick Jones Jr. That's a move that I really do like. His defense is going to play a big part of that. They also bring in Nicholas Batum. He comes back to LA after spending a couple seasons in Philly. It's an interesting signing there, and it's not something that I think is going to matter too much. He's not making a huge contract; it's a $4 million a year contract, so it's not like really anything too much. But this is a really old team. Your youngest player is Zubac and Derrick Jones Jr., who are both 27 right now, aside from draft picks that they made. They do sign Kevin Porter Jr., which is its own mess in itself, right? He's not that great of a player, and he has his off-the-court issues, which I don't know what the Clippers are doing there. I would have left him off the team, but they decide to sign him. That's whatever there. The Clippers kind of feel directionless, right? And the question that I've posed here is, where do the Clippers go from here? There's really no clear answer, right? This is a Clippers team that wants to compete. This is a Clippers team that wants to be good. And this is a Clippers team that's going to hold on to that for as long as they possibly can. This Clippers team doesn't want to be that little brother, doesn't want to be the laughing stock of the league, right? And they've been successful, relatively successful, a solid team for, the last 12-ish, 13 years, 15 years. This is a team that's been good consistently, but they haven't really been able to get over that hump. They made it to a conference finals one time, but they haven't really been able to make that next step. They've never made a finals, even with these great players that they've had on their roster, even with these great opportunities that they've been presented with. And now it kind of comes to a point where it's falling apart. You don't have that many assets to go and make a trade, right? You are running on fumes. Your guys are 35, 36, older, 37. They're not the same as they were in their prime. They're not able to stay healthy as much, and they're not able to propel your teams to success. This Clippers team isn't in a position where it can really blow it up. Like I said, they're opening a new arena. You don't want to open a new arena with a bad team. You want to build, confidence, build success in a new arena, and you don't want to blow it up the same time that you're moving into a new place. So they kind of have their hands tied. They're kind of just going to let time take its toll, and that's really what it seems. That's really how it seems like they're going about it right now, and it's a shame because this Clippers team had so much potential. They go out and they get Kawhi after his finals run, and he has just been unable to stay healthy. They pair up Paul George with him. They bring in James Harden last season, and it seemed like they were finally turning a corner, but then Kawhi gets hurt in the first round. James Harden reverts to playoff James Harden. Russell Westbrook hasn't been the same since he joined the Lakers, right? Uh, this is just a team that doesn't have a lot of options. And it's kind of like a corpse we're just watching, a corpse we're watching slowly wither away. And that's not really, where you want to be as a basketball team. But Clippers don't really have too many options left. They made a trade that really hurt them in getting Paul George. We were talking about it in our meeting today, whether or not that was the worst trade of the recent era. I don't know if it really was, but giving up prospects like Shea and a whole bunch of picks, clearly they lost that trade there, And, you have to sacrifice short term for long term sometimes, but it's part of the life cycle of the NBA. You're going to be good, you're going to be great, you're going to be good, you're going to be bad, right? And if you can stave off that by making savvy moves, savvy trades, great draft picks, you can avoid it. But it seems like the Clippers are at the end of their rope, and it's a shame to see some of these guys go out the way they're going out. And that's not to say that the Clippers are going to be bad this season, because the Clippers still have a guy in Kawhi Leonard who's really good if he can stay on the court. But it's just he hasn't been able to stay on the court, and I don't believe in a James Harden-led team in 2024, 2025. It doesn't inspire me, and I feel like letting Paul George walk was a mistake. I feel like I would have preferred they let James Harden go, but that's just me. There are a lot of other ways that they can go about this. Maybe some of their rookies are going to turn out and surprise everybody. This is that kind of draft. We have no idea what's going to happen. But we are going to close out. Let me know what you think of the Clippers. Where do they go from here? What kind of situation are they in? I think they're kind of directionless right now, and they'll try one more season to succeed. And after it inevitably doesn't work, they'll probably call it quits. But anyway, we're going to move on, close off our show today, talking a little bit about a trade that happened right before free agency between the Hawks and the Pelicans. We'll talk about who won that trade, everything surrounding it, and the whole discussion of where the Hawks and the Pelicans stand now. So stick around for that. We will be right back here on Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. Welcome back to Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus, and before we get into anything on our fifth and final segment, we do have some breaking news. That's right, some breaking news here. We knew it was going to happen with free agency being in full swing. The breaking news right now is Jason Tatum has agreed to a 5-year, $314 Supermax deal with the Boston Celtics, making him the highest paid player in the NBA. This comes off the heels of winning his first NBA Finals, and also after the Celtics sign his teammate Jaylen Brown to a Supermax extension last season. They sign Derek White to a max extension, 4 years, $125 million this year. So they are bringing the whole gang back. This is going to be a tough Celtics team to deal with. It was a matter of time before it happened. We all knew the Celtics were going to give him this league-changing money, but he is now the highest paid player in NBA history. 5 years, $315 million for Jason Tatum. Congratulations to him. Congratulations to the Celtics. Keep it up. They might have a little bit of a dynasty brewing, but the East is coming for them. If you're just tuning in, aside from that breaking news, we've talked a lot of NBA today. That has been the theme of the day, the NBA free agency. We talked about in our first segment, Paul George joining the Philadelphia 76ers, teaming up with Joel Embiid, Tyrese Maxey, and everyone up there in Philly. How that is a great move for Philly, probably the best one that they could have made, as well as what that means for the Clippers. We talked about that in the fourth segment here. We talked about Klay Thompson joining the Dallas Mavericks, the defending Western Conference champions, what he adds to that roster, and why that was a good move. For 3 years, $50 million, that's very cheap for a guy of his shooting caliber. And then we talked about in segment 3 some of my favorite signings: Chris Paul going to the Spurs, KCP going to the Magic, Derrick Jones Jr. going to the Clippers, and we just finished talking about those same Clippers. We talked about how they're kind of stuck in a directionless puddle right now, where they might go from here and what it looks like in the future for the LA Clippers. But we are going to finish off our show still in the NBA, talking a little bit about a trade, another trade that took place, this one over the weekend. That's why it's back here at segment 5. This one between the Hawks and the Pelicans. We're going to talk about DeJounte Murray being traded to the Pelicans for 2 first-round picks, Larry Nance Jr., and a couple of other players. We'll talk about if that's good for the Hawks, what it kind of signals for the Hawks, and what that means for the Pelicans as well. But before we get into that, remember that if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to GSMCPodcast.net. Leave a tip or donation with a message in it. That message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Go ahead and throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate all of you guys for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Monday afternoon. But like I was saying, we are going to finish off our show today, with DeJounte Murray trade. The Hawks traded DeJounte Murray to the Pelicans, signaling, it seemed like, waving the white flag on this team. Now, it might not actually be that. In return, the Hawks got Larry Nance Jr., Dyson Daniels, EJ Little, and 2 first-rounders. So a pretty nice haul for a guy in DeJounte Murray who has really not been everything that was lived up to when he was traded from the Spurs to the Hawks. He was supposed to come in, add that offensive weapon while also being a great defender. His offense has been as advertised, but his defense has not been there, right? His defense has been very lackluster. I won't go as far to say awful, but it has not been good. Adding DeJounte Murray to a Pelicans team that, seems so close. You look at them on paper, they have Zion. They have Brandon Ingram, although not sure how much longer they'll have Brandon Ingram for. He's a little bit on the outs there, especially with his injuries and that's been the story with them. Also, CJ McCollum there. That on paper is a really good and successful roster, and we kind of saw it for one playoff game, what it might look like. Zion Williamson went off, not even a full playoff game against the Lakers, and there's so much promise there, right? There really is. Adding DeJounte Murray, you can never count on Zion being healthy. CJ McCollum needs a little bit more help. He's been that kind of off-ball guy, but he's been more on-ball than you kind of want him to. Brandon Ingram, again, if he can be healthy, he's really good. He's a scoring option. You have 4 legit scoring options if you can stay healthy. But this Pelicans team has not been able to show that it can stay healthy. You lose Jonas Valanciunas to the Wizards. That hurts a little bit. It does, but this Pelicans team is good. Again, on paper is what's happening. There's been trade rumors with Brandon Ingram. But it's one of those situations. It's one of those big what ifs, right? What if Zion stayed healthy? What if the Pelicans were able to stay healthy. You have some great pieces. Herb Jones is a great 3-and-D guy, one of the best defenders in the league. Being able to shoot 40% is insane from three. What this Pelicans team has is, in theory, a team that can be playoff contenders. I'm not sure if they're title contenders. They don't really. Maybe they are if they stay healthy. But again, that is a big, big if. They continue to build on this team, and I like this trade a lot for the Pelicans. They gave up a good amount, but they're kind of in a position where they need to start competing. They need to start winning games. They need to start making the playoffs. They can't just keep making the play-ins every year. They need to start making the actual playoffs, and they need to show that, hey, we're going to be competitive, because otherwise you need to start flipping these assets soon, because people are going to start to leave if you're not winning games. So I love the addition of DeJounte Murray. I think the defense is going to struggle a little bit, but that added offensive weapon, you still have good defenders, Herb Jones, Jose Alvarado. These guys come in and play great defense, so it's not like they're lacking too much in that category. But Dyson Daniels, losing him does hurt a little bit, and those 2 first-round picks. As far as Atlanta goes, from their side of things, they weren't going to keep both Trae Young and DeJounte Murray. They trade DeJounte Murray, and I think that's the right move. A guy like DeJounte Murray is not as valuable as Trae Young. People talk about his defense, but what he brings as an elite playmaker, an elite scorer, you don't get that at a DeJounte Murray. You don't want a DeJounte Murray-led team. You'd much rather have a Trae Young-led team. A Trae Young-led team took you to a conference finals not too long ago, right? And if they can get the right pieces to surround him, this doesn't necessarily mean that they're blowing it up. This just means that, hey, we're thinking about it, right? They had the first overall pick this year. I think they kind of botched that. I know Alex Sarr did not want to play in Atlanta. All signs were saying, hey, he wants to be a Wizard, which, as a Wizards fan, I don't quite understand why he would willingly want to be a Wizard. But the Hawks there, they've made a bunch of interesting decisions, and I think moving off DeJounte Murray isn't necessarily a bad thing. But they need, and getting Larry Nance is a nice big that they need. He's not going to be an elite big that some of these other guys might have gotten in the draft, Alex Sarr, for instance, to pair with Trae Young and get his passing going. But you get an upgrade on defense. You get some NBA-ready players, and it might even be a slight improvement. DeJounte Murray is a big loss offensively, but if there's anybody in the league that can make up for that, you have one on your roster in Trae Young. He's a guy that you can go out and rely on him to score 30 points a night. He's a guy that has the ability to just show up and drop a 50-point game on any given night. He's got that kind of offensive talent, and that's a super rare quality to have in a star. So I don't really mind this trade for either side. I think if I had to pick one right now, the Pelicans probably win this trade, getting the bigger name. But if they aren't able to stay healthy, this is a nothing trade, because DeJounte Murray doesn't add enough to this team himself, if he's the only guy healthy, to really push them over the edge. So if the Pels are able to stay healthy, wonderful move, getting DeJounte Murray. But I don't believe in this team. I know a lot of people are saying that the Pelicans won this trade by a lot. I don't really know about that. I really don't. As much as I like DeJounte Murray, he doesn't provide what you want on the defensive end when you're giving up a lot of assets like this. But anyway, let me know what you guys think of this trade. I know honestly, I think it's a pretty fair trade. I think both sides got what they wanted at this point in their timeline, right? The Hawks got a little bit more for the future, and the Pelicans got a lot more for now. So those are my thoughts there. I think this works out for everybody. But anyway, thank you everybody so much for tuning in to today's episode of Sports by GSMC Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jeremy Lapidus. I hope you guys all have a great rest of your day. We'll be back same time, same place tomorrow to talk about more NBA